Why is it that people seem to misunderstand me? Now, that is a question that I have asked myself for nearly 70 years. When I say misunderstand, I don't mean necessarily misunderstand the words that I say, but just misunderstand me, the way that I am. Well, I came up with the answer, and this is nothing new. This is something that has been known for generations, I believe, is that, well, some of us are just neurologically different. Now, the word retarded is no longer in vogue. People don't use that term anymore because it's been abused and misused so many times that it has become offensive. But it's hard to come up with another term that means the same thing that everybody knows what it means. But I came up with the phrase underdeveloped. So when I say underdeveloped, I'm meaning retarded in a good sense, or in the accurate clinical meaning of the term. So the question again is, why are we so misunderstood? And the reason has something to do with the fact that we are underdeveloped. So you have a baby, and the baby is a newborn baby, and the parents are watching the baby. The physician is observing, and they see that the baby is developing just fine. Intellectually, it's getting along famously right on target where they're supposed to be, where the baby is supposed to be regarding a particular age. But then there is a second baby, and the second baby is not progressing along famously. So they would say that that second baby is underdeveloped. But there's a third baby. This third baby is, well, this is a baby with Asperger syndrome, high-functioning autism. So unlike the first baby that is not underdeveloped, and unlike the second baby who is underdeveloped, the third baby, the Asperger's baby, is partially fully developed and partially not fully developed. Kind of a hybrid. Now, when I was growing up, I had no idea that I was, I don't want to use the term retarded because, again, it has the wrong connotation. But intellectually, I was right on target. Keeping up with the other kids. I didn't have a speech problem. I could understand language. I did math when I bothered to. I could do it. Sometimes I found it boring, but I could do it. I was fine with history. In fact, I kind of loved history. And so all those things were in place. And if you are a person with Asperger syndrome, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about because you went through the same thing. But there is part of your brain that seemed not to be developing. And you did not know that at the time, I assume. But that part of the brain is social development. And people don't understand us because they don't understand that component of our brain and their brain. People don't think about these things. If you see an individual and the person is intellectually developed, they just assume other people believe that the entire person should be developed evenly. Does that make sense? And if they're not developed evenly, they think there must be something else afoot here that is maybe intentional. For example, if we are not developing socially, other people will not interpret that as being a form of mental retardation. Intellectually superior, or at least on target, but socially falling way behind. That's not how they see that. Well, what do they see? Well, sometimes they will see it as being aloof. Sometimes they'll see it as being they'll see it as being lazy, or maybe just not involved, or maybe just don't care about social interactions or things like that. Just weird. It's really come up with that space alien perception. So as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the fact that there are a lot of married couples who have difficulties because the husband typically, I know women also have Asperger syndrome. I think maybe my younger sister had it. She died like 35 years ago, but I'm thinking she too was probably an Aspie, but by and large, when it comes to marital relationships and love relationships, typically it is the husband who is immature because he has Asperger syndrome. And the neurotypical wife, who is intellectually and socially mature, as she should be, relative to people in her age group, sometimes doesn't understand what is it? What is it with this guy that I married? I mean, from the woman's perspective, when they were dating, when they were going through the courtship process, everything seemed to be well. But then she found out that this guy who would soon be her husband was kind of masking, was covering up all of that because, quite frankly, he's trying to put on a good show, trying to make a good impression, put the good foot forward, enhancing his product. And there's really nothing wrong with that, but sooner or later, the real you is going to come out. And if you are a person with Asperger syndrome, eventually the real you will come out and emerge in a marriage relationship or any kind of relationship. And how does that manifest itself? And again, I hate to use the word retarded because it doesn't sound right. But basically, a lot of guys with Asperger syndrome are socially retarded, and in other ways, we are falling way behind, underdeveloped. And that manifests itself in many times in meltdowns. Or maybe the inability to communicate with one's spouse. Now, what I do is I have learned, I understand I've got the problem. I understand that part of my brain is just not developed. It just isn't. It's not that I don't want it to, it just can't. There are some things you just can't learn because you don't have the capability of doing that, but what you can do is recognize that you have the problem. And typically what I will do is when my wife speaks, I may have absolutely positively no interest whatsoever in what she is saying, and my mind is somewhere else. I'm not trying to be rude or aloof or not caring or inconsiderate or unloving. That's just the way my brain is, and so what I have to do is I have to stop and think. And often what I will do when my wife is talking is I will not only stop and listen, but I will actually face her, and I won't turn one way or the other until she stops talking. Sounds kind of weird, right? Until the noise stops. But if you don't do that, what you find happening is the communication of others to you is kind of like the... have you ever watched those Charlie Brown cartoons back? They used to have, what was it, a Christmas and a Thanksgiving every year? I don't know. But you would have these occasions where Charlie Brown or the other Peanuts characters were in school, and you would hear the adults speaking, but it was kind of a wah, wah, wah in the background. You knew they were talking, but you had no idea what they were talking about because, well, it was irrelevant. I think Aspie sometimes have that same perception when other people speak. It's just kind of a wah, wah, wah in the background, and unless we force ourselves to listen, we're not going to pick up on it. And we, quite frankly, don't care. It's just not part of our little world. Well, when you're married, that's got to be a part of your little world because there's this other person who is involved that you care about. And so you got to stop and you got to interpret the wah, 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 whatever that is, and make sure you understand because this other person is, they are not socially retarded like you are, but they are right up there on par where they should be, and you got to recognize that and you got to fill that gap. So we also have to come to terms with these things called meltdowns, and I still have those now and again, but your wife may not understand that completely, and you come across as really, really, really immature. And the reason you come across like that is because you are really, really, really immature. You say, well, you're acting like a little kid. Yeah, you are, because that part of your brain is not developed. It still is, in a sense, it still is a little kid. Well, how do you deal with this? I mean, what do you do with these things where people think that they just don't understand you? And it seems that wherever you go, whatever you do, whatever life circumstances, people really, they don't understand you because they can't understand because it's never occurred to them that part of your brain is fully developed and part of it's not. Nobody stops and thinks of that. Well, some people do, but it's extremely rare. So let's talk about this for just a moment. We're almost done here, but I made a list of 9 things, and I'm just going to kind of rattle through these things real quickly. But number one, we already mentioned, is marriage relationships where the husband behaves like a child because he is a child. And I know sometimes the marriage relationship works the other way, where it's a neurotypical husband and an Aspie wife. I've never seen that before, but I know it's out there. And if you have encountered it, maybe in a relationship like that, I'd kind of like to hear from you just to hear what your experiences are. But the second thing I came up with is, and some of these are kind of redundant because we've talked about them in videos in the past, is that we say and do things that are very, very, very abnormal. We don't know they're abnormal. Well, we kind of sort of do because we want to fit in, but we don't know how to do that because that part of the brain that says this is social behavior normalcy is just not there. That part of your engine was never part of your engine to begin with. And if it is there, it's not working properly. And unlike an engine, you can't have brain surgery and have something installed to make it work the way that everyone else's engine works. The third thing I came up with is, we already talked about this briefly, is just we come across as being aloof. When I'm in a group of people, I typically do not want to talk to them. I find it uncomfortable. I find it challenging. I find it difficult. And I also have come to realize that people expect you to behave as if, socially, as if you are not underdeveloped. Because they just don't get it. If you are intellectually developed, and I just said this a minute ago, but for emphasis, if you are intellectually developed, and people with Asperger's, that's part of the definition. You are intellectually developed or maybe superior. And people expect your whole brain to work that way. And when part of it does and part of it doesn't, they don't realize that's part of your brain not working. They think you're being a jerk. They think you're being aloof or something else. Or they think you're being just flat out lazy. Now, when you were in high school, I know a lot of people who have Asperger syndrome who do really well in academics, and others because they just somehow they have tied their academic environment with a social environment, and so they don't perform well academically. And people see that, you're just being lazy, or you're being disinterested, or you're being unmotivated. Another thing I came up with is there seems to be this conflict, this perennial conflict that is observed between intellectual maturity and social maturity, and they can't jive. I mean, we can work on it and try to smooth it over so we don't make ourselves uncomfortable for other people, but it's not going to ever be totally the way it should be as perceived by people with who are neurotypical. It's just not going to happen. So they observe that conflict, which is normal for us, but for them it's abnormal. And the only thing they can do is they can reject us because they don't understand it. They don't understand it. And the problem is, for a lot of people with Asperger syndrome, we don't understand it either. For many years, I was well into adulthood before I even knew what Asperger syndrome was, let alone that I had it or how it worked or when I encountered someone else who was an Aspie. I approached them much the same way that a person with who was neurotypical would approach them. What's wrong with this guy? He's acting weird just like me. I didn't know it was a phenomenon. I didn't know it was a syndrome. Number 7 is something else I add, is that, we tend to be detail-oriented, and people see that, and they wonder, and this is kind of odd, but they wonder, what's wrong with us? Why is this guy so fixated on details? Now, you would think that's a positive sign, and other people wouldn't be particularly bothered by that, but reality is, anything that is different, anything that is out of the ordinary, they will see that as something that is weird. Something else I came up with are speech differences. We've talked about this many times in other videos, no point to prolong it, but one of the challenges that people with Asperger syndrome often encounter is we have a different vocabulary. We use words that other people do not use. They may or may not know the definition, understand the terms, but they don't use them because the way their social brain has developed and their interaction with others, including conversation, has developed. There's just some words they don't use. Everybody, I think, knows what the word negligible means. How many people actually use that in the course conversation? Well, nobody, but an Aspie. And when other people rather hear you say a word like negligible, they're like, why did you even say that? The reason you said it is because it's the best word. It applies. It makes perfect sense to you, to me, to people with Asperger syndrome. Then there is number 9, and I could probably come up with 90 of these. Maybe you could come up with some others. Is we tend to have an elevated sense of honesty and integrity. Now, that is one that just kind of blows my mind in a positive sense. People who have Asperger syndrome tend to be honest, and they tend to have a high value of integrity. And at the same time, they tend to be underdeveloped socially. So let me just ask you, get your opinion of this. What do you think? Is there a connection there? Is it conceivably possible that one of the reasons that people are dishonest and don't value integrity as highly as we think they should is because that's just how the social mind works? That the two, maybe it's not cause and effect, but they're comorbid. One of the reasons they get along so well with others is because these people aren't honest. I mean, they are honest, but they don't value honesty, some of them are honest. They don't value honesty, integrity the same way we do. All right, you see those two rectangles on the screen. If you want the conversation to keep on going, all you got to do, click on one of those rectangles, and we will keep talking. If not, we'll see y'all next time.